Today I'm coming out of the water and saying a few things about taking photographs on the beach. Hi, I'm Lucian. I take photos under the water and lots of other fun stuff. So if that's something that interests you, then subscribe to this channel. If you like me, you don't just stick to one genre of photography. I like formal portraiture as much as I like street photography, narrative photography as much as documentary, and that spills over into what I photograph. I think if you approach your image making with intention, it's easy to get these divides straight in your head. So today I'm breaking down beach photography into a few overlapping categories, from the formal to the informal, and what guides me when I'm at the beach and my intention when I'm photographing people at the beach specifically. And what I'm going to do is illustrate this with a few examples of my own photography. The first is what I would describe as a street or a snapshot aesthetic. These are images captured candidly with Henri Cartier-Bresson's decisive moment as a guiding principle, that is, moments in time that capture a truth, whether big or small, about the human condition, about human behaviour. For me, these images are just about enjoying the freedom of the beach, and I feel humour can have a place in these images. The beach is often the site of rest and play. It doesn't have to say something profound or meaningful. In these images, the quality of the light is less important than the juxtaposition of the subjects, and for this reason you can be taking these sorts of photographs throughout the day. Although this may sound simple, it's important to know what the subject is. Ask yourself, what are you actually taking a photograph of? And then present that subject in as clean and simple a composition as possible. As much as possible, the image should convey a narrative, even if, as is often the case, the subject didn't intend that. For example, here my subject was just goofing around, but in the shot I chose, I believe she carries an aloof distance, turning away from the viewer in her own world. I think a smaller aperture and a longer depth of field works best, as it's the interaction of subjects in context that's able to better convey a narrative in these images. I always try to get the right moment and angle to eliminate as much extraneous information as possible, as illustrated in this image of kids playing on a beach playground in Spain. I normally make a note to crop out extraneous detail and to straighten images so that there's less to distract the viewer from the subject. Aside from humour, there's also a place for quiet reflection and poignancy in this sort of category, celebrating short moments of human contemplation and intimacy in the landscape. The second category I'd call beach life, for want of a better title, and this just celebrates beach activity, beach life, but not necessarily with that same street aesthetic that I had in my first category. So by this I mean some of the rituals associated with beach life, like travel to and from the beach, watching the sunset or swimming. Getting interesting angles, such as here from behind a wave, can make these images more arresting. It's always important to take your time framing and composing your shot, even if you think your subject, as it is here, is about to run off. I think it's important not to be so overwhelmed by the feeling you've found a good subject or pose to forget that a compelling composition is also just as important in making an image stand out. By the way, these particular images were taken with the original Sony A7R, and that clunking noise you can hear is the mechanical shutter. It didn't even have a digital shutter, and that is the actual sound. It had the loudest shutter sound of any camera I've ever owned, and I've owned quite a few. Aside perhaps a little bit from the original street category I identified, light is always important for people photographs, so in the beach life category I tend to favour light in the morning or evening or after dark, for light that will make your subjects look their best. A third category is what I would call beach abstract, and it's one in which we boil down key elements, individual aspects into singular motifs. Although these are still images of people interacting with the beach, they are somewhat depersonalized. The idea is to convey beach life by the inclusion of motifs which carry meaning about that place. The meaning is something brought by the viewer of your photograph, but you're taking them along on your journey, leading the way and highlighting whatever the motif is. In-camera composition is just as important as in the other categories I've identified, alongside cropping and editing once you're at home in front of your computer. I also don't think it hurts, once you've identified a motif, to keep practicing it to get it right. As with the other categories, playing with different angles of view, for example getting down low or shooting up, can eliminate distractions from your frame. Likewise, shooting with a longer shutter speed can convey important aspects of movement, as in these images of wave wash around subjects with a bodyboard. These particular images were shot handheld at 1/4 of a second, enough to convey movement and distill the action down to the essential. There's really no end to these moments once you start looking, and I would encourage you to seek these moments in your own day-to-day photographing, always asking the question, how can I reduce this scene down to its essential elements? The next category I'm calling In the Water, and for want of a better title, and they're photographs simply of people in the water, immersed in the water, enjoying the water, and they are taken from the water. In many cultures, water carries a symbolism of rebirth or of freedom, and often also emotion. It's true that most of us read photographs with the cultural language we've grown up in, so the water motif will more often than not carry these same associations for viewers. I know that it does for me, and that's why I return to it again and again as a key element in my photographs of people at the beach. In many of these particular images, on a practical level, I'm using a camera in a waterproof case, often after taking images under the water. Sometimes there's the evidence of water on the lens port, which can be a hindrance to good image making, but in some instances can also be used to your advantage. I call these happy accidents, in which the technical imperfection increases the ethereality or otherworldliness of the image and conveys a greater depth of meaning. Images in which the water occupies a large portion of the frame, with the subject almost overwhelmed by it, can also be effective. When taking images in this context, I will take a sequence of images while my subject plays and interacts with the water or the sea, as in this sequence of images, and then choose one from the sequence. Alternatively, I will ask a subject on a more formal level to pose for the camera with more deliberate framing and composition and a formal structure, using a wider aperture and therefore shallow depth of field, including occasionally turning the camera on myself if I can't find anyone to pose for me. So that brings me to formal or direct portraits, in which I've asked an individual or a group of individuals to pose for a formal portrait on the beach, and in which they're often addressing the viewer's gaze directly. In this category, you can probably slow down the most and take the most care in framing and composing and making your subject at ease in front of the camera. Again, I'll usually open the aperture to get a shallow depth of field and aim to have a low ISO to get the fine detail of the subject, usually aiming for the eyes to be in the sharpest focus. It's often true that towards the end of the day, after a period of time on the beach, people are relaxed and they're open to being photographed. Being considerate and respectful of your subject and their time is essential when photographing them. I think the beach is a place of personal exposure and vulnerability, especially after immersion in the sea, and therefore suits itself to finding truth in portrait making. But that also means there's a responsibility with you as the photographer to convey your subject with dignity, respect, and compassion. With formal portrait making, you can take the time to slow down and try different angles or poses. Your subject is your collaborator, and whether you speak or direct them a lot or a little, I think it's important that they're comfortable and have input into how they're being portrayed. I will often go through several iterations of a pose until I'm happy, not all of which will have the subject directly looking at the camera. Getting some shots with the subject looking away or with their eyes closed is always worthwhile, I think. Another effective way to create beach portraits, particularly with children, is to use props or activities as a way into a portrait session. So the portrait becomes a natural extension of the beach activity rather than something you're making people do away from what, they'd prefer to be doing. You as the photographer should have a vision of the type of image you're creating, and therefore you're the one with the most invested in getting your subjects to pose for you. For others, your vision might be irrelevant. Therefore, the less you can make this an imposition on your subjects, the better. In this instance, fluttering towels on a windy day led naturally into making portraits with the towel. Without the windy towel game, the portrait session may have felt more onerous on the subject. If you spend as much time at the beach as me, these moments come up all the time. If you're able to combine them with good light and having your camera with you handy, the images make themselves. The last category I want to include, and it's one that it sort of encapsulates all of them, as one I want to call grand landscape. And in this, it's the beach that's the champion, and the people are little actors on this grand stage, which is the landscape or the beach. I always look for moments that will convey the majesty and size of the landscape and human small place within it. The beach is an ideal place for this. So in these instances, taking a step back or using a wide lens to convey this can convey the idea. In almost all examples here, the lighting is subdued and muted, using evening or dusk light to portray the landscape to its best. Whether engaged in an activity or just enjoying the space, the idea is to convey the size of the landscape in relation to the subject. Always pay as much attention to your background as to your foreground. Your viewer probably won't, not consciously anyway, but that's only because you've done the right work and attention at the point of photographing and have eliminated any distractions from your frame. With this type of shot, I try to treat the landscape formally, get a level horizon as always, and aim for a balanced composition. So that's my overview of what guides my intention when I'm photographing people at the beach. I hope that you've gained some insight and this has helped you and will help you in your own photography, especially when you're taking photographs of people at the beach. If it has helped you, I'd really appreciate if you could like this video, subscribe to my channel for more material, fun stuff just like this. So until next time, bye for now.